Okay, today is the 13th of October, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Ernie Alterwitz at his home at 63 Zora Lane in Stamford, Connecticut. Hi, Ernie.
Hi, Les. How you doing?
Okay. Thank you for giving us the time to tell us about growing up in Stamford. You were born in Stamford?
Born in Stamford, Stamford Hospital, April 28th, 1931.
So that makes you almost
70. I am 78.
78 already. Okay. Do you remember who your delivering doctor was?
No, and I have nobody to ask.
Okay. All right, because most of the people from your age, it was Dr. Nemoitin, and a few had
Absolutely.
Dr.
He was the known doctor around the area.
Yeah. And your parents, were they born in the United States?
My dad was born in West New York, New Jersey, and my mother was born in Norwalk, Connecticut.
Oh, that's interesting. Because most of the people your age that we've interviewed have come from Eastern Europe.
Yeah. I was born in this country.
And you went to school?
I went to school, began at Elm Street School.
Where were you living then?
I was living near Belltown. Living on Strawberry Hill. I was supposed to go to course from Sacred Heart Academy, 207 Strawberry Hill Avenue. And that's just before 5th Street.
Mm-hmm.
Across from Sacred Heart Academy. And I was supposed to go to Belltown School. But because my grandparents had a little grocery store across from Elm Street School, they worked a deal where I could go to Elm Street School and after school go into my grandparents' little grocery store and their apartment.
Their grocery store was on Elm Street?
Right on Elm Street, just across from the school.
And how many grades were you?
There were 6 grades there, and the principal was Reginald Newwine. And when I got through with the 6th grade, I went to Burdick Junior High School, and my principal moved to Burdick Junior High School, Reginald Newwine, for 7 through 9. And when I went to Stamford High School, Reginald Newwine follows us to Stamford High School, so he was our principal at high school, which was 9 through 12.
When you were in high school, were you active in any sports activities or extracurricular?
I was active in the Jewish Center activities more than the school activities. Played some basketball.
Okay.
You were active.
I was active in Burdick Junior High School as the pitcher for the Burdick Junior High School team, baseball team, and I pitched through 7th through 9th grade, and I also wrestled. I was on the wrestling team from the 7th and the 9th grade through Burdick Junior High School.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to Stamford High School, I got more in independent sports of baseball and softball and basketball, which related more to the Jewish Center than it did to the Stamford High School. Mm-hmm. And I was very active in those 3 sports, also bowling, and continued that through high school. And even later on, I went into softball and hardball in the independent Stamford League that they had years ago, but not affiliated with Stamford High School itself.
When you were in high school, were there any special things you remember? Any teachers who were very...
Yes, there was Abe Hecht, who was a history teacher.
Yeah.
And he was always fun to be with. He was a big New York Giant baseball fan. And I was fortunate a couple of the very tough teachers I didn't get. Yeah. Or I might have been in trouble. But I had a nice... enjoyed Stamford High School and took French, Latin, and Spanish, and enjoyed it through Stamford High School. A lot of friends, and we would go to the Jewish Center when we got through at Stamford High School. After we broke at school around 2 o'clock, I would spend 2 or 3 hours at the Stamford Jewish Center, with then on Prospect Street. And
when you were in high school, did you find any overt anti-Semitism, or did you...
I did find some problems with the baseball team, which I I could name names, but it's up to you if you want to get involved with that. There were some that were definitely.
That were on the staff or just play?
One was the baseball manager and coach, and one was a physical ed director. And I had a couple of scenes with them that weren't too normal. But I could name names, but I don't really. It's up,
Not as
whatever.
necessary.
Not necessary.
It's-
Other than that, everybody was fine.
But by and large, your days in high school, you say, were enjoyable.
Enjoyable. I was even in one play in the senior class, in a play that they put on by Stanford High School. But they were enjoyable. Stanford High was fine. No
And
problem.
after graduating high school, did you pursue your education any further?
I was going to go into my dad's business, which was the Bronx Bar Supply, and work there. But my mother wanted me to get an education, so I attended the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, which there were some people in Stanford that went there, and I knew a couple of fellas who were instrumental in getting me to the school, and I registered there, was there for a short time, at 1949, and spent about 4 or 5 months there. And then I left the University of Alabama and went into my dad's business. And that's where I was for 1949 for 60 years.
And is that where you met your wife?
I met my wife in 1949 about Thanksgiving time while I was at the University of Alabama. She was a senior in high school, and my friend begged me to go on a blind date and go out, and I said, I don't want to get involved with any women right now. I'm going in business too far away. But he talked me into going out on a blind date in 1949, and she was in Birmingham, Alabama, which was about an hour and a half away. And I met her, and we had a relationship for 3 years, which wasn't perfect, being so far away, but that's who I married. And 1952, I got married to my wife.
And then were you married in Stanford? Or?
I was married in Birmingham, Alabama,
Oh.
in a hotel called the Hotel Tutwiler. And a small crowd of about 30, 40 people were there in attendance. And I was very young. I was 21 and my wife was 20. And we came back and ended up in Woodside Village in Stamford, Connecticut, which was our first residence. Small apartment that my mother went over and cleaned about 20 times to make sure that we would go in there and it would be clean enough for us to go in. Because she was a very, very clean woman, and apartments had to be done by her to know that it was excellently done.
How much was the rent then?
The rent was $69.60 a month. Second floor apartment, and 1 bedroom, very small, and you walked up and you walked down. So it was interesting and fun, and we were very young, and we enjoyed it. My wife really didn't even know there was a Connecticut. She knew New York City, but she didn't know there was a Connecticut. So I introduced her to Stamford, Connecticut, and she's been a great follower of Stamford ever since, better than I've been.
And how long did you live at Woodside Village?
We were there, I would say 6 years. We moved from one side of Woodside Village to a little larger apartment when we had our second son. And we stayed there another year, and altogether about 6.5 years before we bought our first house in Stamford, which was near Belltown on Brighton Place.
Okay.
And we were there 10 years in the new house. So that was where our residence was for the next 16 years. Our children went to Belltown School, and they went on to high school in Ripplewound. And that was, we had the 3 boys.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. We had interesting life growing up with the kids. It was fun. We enjoyed it. And I was working since then and worked ever since. And my wife got very used to Stanford and to Brighton Place where we lived. It was a nice little house, and that's where we were there for 10 years, till we moved in 1968.
To this location where
To
we
this
are right
location
now.
where we are now, 63 Zora Lane, and we've been here 41 years.
So, how much did you pay for the house?
The house cost $68,500. We bought it from a bank in Stamford who was selling it and was happy to get rid of it. And it was only 2.5 years old. Beautiful place, and we jumped at the thought of living out in the country, relatively out in the country. So we bought it and lived here. We've been very happy over the years here, and enjoyed it very much. We sold our house on Brighton Place. It was 27 Brighton Place.
So now you're living in Stamford, you have 3 children,
Right.
and you're working at with your
Bronx
dad.
Bar Supply Company.
So tell us, how did it get its name?
Well, it was very prestigious back in the 30s when they started to use a New York name. So they named it Bronx Bar Supply for whatever reason they thought. Being a New York name, they felt it was quite honorable at that time. And that's where they never worked in the Bronx. They were in Stamford. They started on Pacific Street. That was our first location in 1933.
Where on Pacific Street?
92 Pacific Street, which was down about 3/4 of the way in Pacific Street on the left-hand side. Very small place. And I was introduced as a kid to the cases and toilet paper and towels and everything else they had in there, with some glassware.
So what actually were you selling it to, and who were your customers?
Our customers were bars, cafes, restaurants. We sold them paper goods, cleaning supplies, glassware, all small utilities. No heavy restaurant equipment, just the smaller supplies.
Did you sell food?
We sold food, but that was later on. That came probably about 12 to 15 years after they opened in the mid-40s. And they got into the food line of non-perishables, canned food and stuff like that, but no frozen food or meats or anything like that. But they
And-
did get into the food line for the restaurants.
When you were working on Pacific Street, do you remember any of the other shops that
Well, I
were?
remember the other shops. I didn't work there because I was very young, and they moved about when I was 10, 11 years old. But I do remember the shops. We had Max Meyer's appetizing store next to us, and there was the Trunk and Umbrella store, and
That
there
was
the
Mr.
Atlantic.
Wattenberg.
Yeah, Wattenberg. And I remember Brazel's Butcher Shop, and Fleischer's Meat Market was next to us, and J. Edis Levine was down further, where he had a drugstore at the end of Pacific Street. And there was a few other kosher butchers in the area. I can't remember all of them, but there was a few there, and I don't remember their names specifically. But there were other stores there. 3 or 4 kosher butchers.
There was Saltzman and Platsky. that I
Right,
remember.
right.
Yeah.
There you go. The Saltzman brothers. There were 2 brothers there. I think Vic was one of them. I can't remember the names.
Martin. was
And then
one.
you had Wise's paint store there. Sam Wise, who was in the paint store business, and a few other stores I can't basically remember. I think there was a electrical company there too, or
I know Charlie
Pacific,
Sachs was there.
or one of them. The Sackman, is it, or
Well, that was a glass store.
that was the glass store? Yeah, I think they were there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And any of the others, so offhand, I don't know. I know there was a couple of bars there on the right-hand side. And it was a busy street,
Yeah.
very busy street.
So when you came to work, was your dad the sole proprietor?
No, my dad was a partner with a man by the name of John DeSessa. And they started the business in the early 30s. They got together. My dad was working at the National Soda Water Company, and this John used to come in on Sundays or Saturdays. They became buddies, and they decided to get out of this. He decided, my father, to get out of the soda water business, and then they got into the restaurant supply business together in the mid 33, 34.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they started on Pacific Street. But they were equal partners. And they ran that for, quite a few years. And then they moved to Atlantic Street. 481 Atlantic Street was above the post office. And they had to get out of there because the thruway was coming through.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they looked for property and found it up on Fairfield Avenue. And that's where we are. The company is today. It's been in business 75 years. And they're still operating under other management.
How big a territory were you covering when you were working for them?
We covered about 35, 40 miles. We went up as far as New Haven and Waterbury in Connecticut, and went down to Westchester County in New York State. Did not go into the city of New York.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a 35, 40 mile radius. And they had some trucks and they had help. And they grew a little larger all the time as they proceeded in business. And as I say, I came in 49.
So when you expanded and you went into non-perishables, what was it?
Right, that was the food. That was the food end of it.
Uh,
And got more into paper supplies and more into other light supplies. And had a bigger store on Atlantic Street. Then, of course, when we moved to Fairfield Avenue, that was a decent size piece of property up there. And that's when they really enlarged a lot of their buying potential.
when you were on the store, the more of the business area like Atlantic Street, Pacific Street, were you doing both retail and wholesale, or did you
Mostly
walk-in?
wholesale, but they were open to people who came off the street or restaurants who wanted to come in.
Yeah.
We were next to Hugo's restaurant on Atlantic Street. Hugo had a restaurant there. There was always battles when our trucks came in to leave us merchandise and with parking for his customers at the restaurant next door. So it wasn't a very friendly situation for quite a few years. Well, we were there for a long time, and then they decided to move because the thruway was going to be open, and they were in the way of the thruway, and they were allowed to get out of there. And that was part of the thruway that 95 came in and took over.
Do you know what was in that location before Hugo's?
That I can't tell you.
I can tell you.
Well, then you can tell me. That's
Because
great.
that was the Montgomery Ward store.
You're right. I think
Yeah.
I remember Montgomery.
Because my dad
Ward.
worked there.
And there also was a clothing store across the street run by Rabinowitz.
There was Rabinowitz, and then on the corner was Levine, Blackie
Right.
Levine's father, and then you
Right.
had Conspor's
Right.
and Greenberg's.
Absolutely. Right near the railroad
And
station.
Mecklenburg,
Yeah, Greenberg, I remember.
Mecklenburg had a cigar and paper store.
Right. You're
And
right.
the Stanford
You're right
Shopper
about that.
was up there.
I remember Rabinowitz. I remember Harvey was one of the brothers.
Right.
I don't remember the other one.
So then,
We moved in about 1952 or 1953 to go to Fairfield Avenue. So I'd say they were there about 10 years on Atlantic Street. Because we originally moved in around 1942 from Pacific Street to go to Atlantic Street. And the third location was Fairfield Avenue.
so I assume on Fairfield Avenue that your dad and his partner purchased the building.
They purchased it. They actually, what they did is they purchased a whole area of land there with two other partners. Van Japani, who owned a character toy store in Norwalk, and Sam Silverman, who was in the real estate business. My dad and his partner, the four of them, purchased that. And they had the whole area, but they didn't put in the Bronx Bar Supply. That was my father's and his partner. They did purchase the areas around there. And then that was later sold to Stanford House Wrecking, which was the Goldblum family. But they didn't own Bronx Bar Supply, which was about an acre of land in the middle that stayed in my dad and his partner's name. And that property was right in the middle of what they sold to Goldblum.
It's interesting. I never knew that Mr. Mangiapane was, into expanding into real estate, because as a kid I worked in the Ace Baby Carriage store, which was on Atlantic Street,
Yeah.
right up near where you're talking about your Bronx Bar Supply was.
Yeah, his name was Caesar Mangiapane.
Right.
And he was very friendly with my dad's partner, John DeSessa. Their wives were friendly. So he wanted to get involved in that purchase there.
Yeah.
And they didn't have it for too many years when they sold all the property to Goldblum, except the property where Bronx Bar Supply was.
Well, Mr. Mangiapane owned, as you said, the character, and what he
Toy
did, he
Store and all that.
manufactured stuffed animals, like the
Right,
like the
you're
Steiff
absolutely
toys.
right. You're absolutely
And I
right.
can remember at the time, we used to buy these stuffed Dumbo elephants at his factory in Norwalk to retail in the store. And he lived right up here on Newfield Avenue, not
Right,
too far from here.
that's true.
Yeah.
But their store, I think, was in Norwalk.
Yeah, their factory was in Norwalk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their property was in Norwalk. And as I say, my dad and my grandfather and uncle came from Romania when they were in the soda water business. And they came here knowing the soda water business, and they opened up in the early 1900s on Franklin Street. His name was Isaac Alter, my grandfather's brother, Izzy Alter, and my grandfather was Morris Alterwitz. The funny thing is they had different last names, but they were brothers. My grandfather was running away from the Romanian army, so he added a Witz on the end of his name to make it Alterwitz, and his brother, Isaac Alter, kept his same name. So my name really was Alter, but it became Alterwitz. That's how it became Alterwitz. And they opened on Franklin Street in the early, I would say around 1910 or so, National Spring Water. And my dad worked there probably up through the middle 1920s as a delivery fella, pick up the old bottles, and got a lot of scars and a bent over shoulder from carrying the cases up to tenement houses to people's living quarters.
I remember, the place on Franklin Street,
Yeah.
and it always remained on Franklin Street. till it
Yes, they
closed.
never moved. That was their final resting place.
Yeah.
And the youngest brother, my dad's youngest brother, Melvin Alterwitz, took over the business later on and went into the dispenser end of it, going to restaurants where he would set up dispensers in it, and that was the end of the bottle business. And then he later sold that and retired. So he was in it after my dad was, and a couple of the sisters who were there. So
I
it was
can
interesting.
remember going to your grandfather's to buy cases of seltzer in the siphon bottles.
Absolutely.
And he used to fill those bottles with the compressed gas. There was a machine in there that put the water and the gas in the bottles, and I remember he was holding them upside down.
Right.
And didn't one explode in his...
Oh, it was awful. My dad had scars all over him from that place.
Really?
But the one gal who was really very outstanding in that business was my grandmother, Bessie. That was my grandfather's wife. She became loving Florida. And in April of every year, she would come around to her children to grab a little money so she could go to Florida and stay there for about 6 or 8 months. So she was quite a lady, and they didn't have a very together life after that, because she loved to go to Florida and she would leave by herself after she visited her children, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And stayed there for 6 to 8 months in Florida.
How many children were there in the family?
Actually, there were 4 daughters and 2 sons, but there really was 5. One of the daughters died at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
So there were remaining 4 daughters and the 2 sons. And it was interesting. It was an interesting life. I wasn't as close to my grandparents on my father's side as I was on my mother's side. So whatever I tell you is about what I know.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot more that went on. I hung out with my mother's parents.
I can remember Yudi Posner, who worked for your grandfather for many years.
A lot of different people worked
Yeah,
there.
and he would come around, and they had a house route where they would come, once a week, and he would
Right.
pick up the empty bottles
Right.
and deliver, all the different flavors of soda that they had
Well,
bought.
they had them all from sarsaparilla to
Yeah.
any kind you could think of, and they had a nice reputation. But they never got any larger than they were on Franklin Street.
And then they had a competitor in Stanford, as I recall, on Washington Court. I think it was
Yes,
Silver.
Silver, right?
Yeah.
Silver and Company, and there was a Schuler, which was from out of town. There were 3 or 4 small soda companies that they were in competition with, but they managed to do okay.
Yeah.
They did all right. And my grandfather also was quite a character. He used to make his own wine and drink his own wine. So he had a lot of following.
Yeah.
They were characters. They were characters.
Was there a Romanian group, or because most of the old timers were from Russia, not from Romania?
Yeah, I think it was a mixed group as far as I know. And I didn't know too personally who they got involved in, but my grandfather was he was quite a guy, and he would lend people money and they would never pay him back. So he was known for that, and he was loose with the buck for his friends, and he went through a lot of people that never paid him back when he passed away. But he was quite a character. He lived alone a lot of it because she took off for Florida, and she was there a long period of time. She was a great card player, great bingo player, and she was a winner. She was a very bright gal. I went with her on a few of her escapades to play bingo, and she always had 1 million stuffed dolls in front of her and everything. She was quite a character.
Where did she go in Florida? I mean, in those
The
early-
lower side of Miami, and she would sing on the beach.
On South Beach, probably.
South Beach, all the way down, and she would sing a lot of risque songs, and they would give her money, and that was part of her getting money from people down there. She was quite a character. Her name was Bessie, and she was quite a Bessie. That much I remembered about her.
I can remember, 'cause we had been going to South Miami probably for the past 40 years when my in-laws would live either there for the winter or then move full time.
Right.
And on Sunday mornings at Loomis Park, which is now the real upbeat, young group,
Area that's down there.
yeah, they would have a Yiddish talent show on Sunday mornings.
That's interesting.
That, there would be a vaudeville acts and singing and, us to talk about.
Well, we had 3 nice children, okay? I got my son and 2 daughters.
What are their names?
They grew up in Stanford. One is Mark, and then there's Mindy, and then there's Lynn. And they all grew up in Stanford. And my son is still here in Stanford, who was within me in business. And Mindy is in New Jersey, okay? And I have 6 grandchildren. It goes from 24 to 4-year-olds. And they live here in Stanford. And my granddaughter, who's 24, is going to be married soon, and she bought a house in Stanford, and she's living in Stanford now with her own house. And my daughter, Lynn, is a teacher in Roxbury School, and she has 2 children, 8 and 4. And Mindy has 2 children. I think she's, 12 and 7. The girl is going to be bas mitzvah next year, bas mitzvah. And it was very nice. I just, at Roxbury School, I had, if you can find the picture right, Fran, I don't know. I had just become, I'm a veteran, and they asked me to come all the time to Veterans Day at Roxbury School. They had 4 other veterans there, and had the grandchildren, you know, and we marched on the stage, and I had my grandson in front of me wearing my uniform.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, you got some nice pictures. Fran's got the pictures there, and it was really nice, you know. And the principal introduces us, you know,
Yeah.
and there, it was a nice thing. Also, I marched with the veterans, and Jewish war veterans. I belong to the Jewish war veterans here in Stanford, and we marched in the parade, Veterans Day parade. And what I do is I take a car, one of my cars, my old cars, and when the guys get tired and they can't walk anymore, why they jump in the car with me. And right now I'm retired and having a nice time, and hoping to be going to Florida pretty soon.
Well, Bob, it's been great listening to your experiences being a native of Stanford. There are not too many natives left around.
That's right.
And hi, Fran. It's a pleasure to be here today to interview you. Tell us, Fran, what was your maiden name?
Lermount.
How do you spell that?
Lermount.
And where were you born?
I was born in the Bronx, Bronx Hospital.
And when did you move to Norwalk?
I was about 10 or 11 years old.
And were your parents born in this country?
Yes,
And what was your dad's name?
Edward,
And where was he born?
in New York.
And your mother?
In New York.
New York City? How about your grandparents? Were they also from Europe, or were they,
They were from Europe, but they all wound up in the Bronx.
what part of Europe were they from? Do you have any idea?
Some from Russia, some from Poland, and that's about all that they ever told me.
And what did your grandparents do for a living in New York? Do you have any idea?
Yes, my father's mother and dad worked, did costumes for the theater people, the actors and actresses. Mostly a lot of feathers for the hats, feathers for the costumes, and it was all for the theater productions.
So did they manufacture or just design the
They
garments?
designed and manufactured. My dad was in that for a while too.
And this was in New York City
In
as
New
well?
York, yes.
And what did your parents do for a living?
Well, my mother in the Bronx had her own lingerie shop. My dad actually ran the Allerton Avenue Theater. My mother's store was a few doors down, and that's how they met. And when they got married, we moved to Seagate. And my mother was expecting me, and she went to visit her family in the Bronx, and the doctor said, you better not go back home because you're going to have this baby any minute. And me being as stubborn as I guess I am, I didn't come for 2 weeks later. And then we went back to Seagate.
Where is Seagate?
In New York. In Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Right
you-
near Coney Island, on the boardwalk. We had the boardwalk and all that. We had a private home.
So do you have any recollection of Coney Island as a child?
Yeah, a little bit. But
What do you remember about it?
I remember the boardwalk. I remember walking on it. I remember some of the rides. My most impressive thing was when I lived in Seagate, we had to pass through a guardhouse and prove we were residents to get into our area, into our own home. And to me that was very, very impressive as very young. And then we moved from there into Brooklyn, into a different part of Brooklyn. And we lived there for about 5 years. My dad worked, traveled around. My mother worked on Kings Highway in New York, and then we came to Connecticut.
So your mother
Sharlach.
no longer had the lingerie shop?
No, my grandfather remarried. She had lost her mother when she was about 18. My grandfather remarried, and he and his wife ran the store.
And your dad no longer worked at the theater?
No.
So what did he do when you moved to Brooklyn?
I don't remember exactly what he did when I was that young. Really don't. But as the years progressed, he was managed, as the stores became more department store type thing, he managed the shoe departments and would help build the stores. He would go from state to state and help them organize the different departments and work setting up displays and setting up what department would look good where. And he almost always managed the shoe departments.
Was this for one particular store, or did he freelance for?
No, he would
He
do
did
that
for many different
yeah,
stores.
many different stores. Small family stores, not any name that I would remember, but not any name that would make any difference to anybody.
Yeah.
And when we moved to Connecticut because the war was on, and the gentleman that owned in South Norwalk, this clothing store, men's clothing store on Washington Avenue, he was going into the service. And through a mutual friend, they hired my dad to run the store. And
What kind of a store was it?
It was Man's Haberdashery.
And what was the name of it?
I don't remember. I really don't remember. And then when the man who owned it came back, unfortunately let my father go. And then my father, actually he started, again he did Bloomingdale's, yeah. When Bloomingdale's was being built, he went in and he kind of organized and set up the shoe department in Bloomingdale's. And then he opened up finally opened up in Norwalk, his own shoe store. That was called Edward's Shoe Den.
Where was it located?
On Main Street in Norwalk. And then he moved to another location, and unfortunately there was a major storm, and I don't remember the year, and a lot of the stores were washed away. So he gave up on that, and he went to work for some other friends of his that also had shoes departments. And then he gave that up, and he went into like traveling when pantyhose came in, and that was something very new. He got involved with a company, and he was representative for them, and he went and he sold pantyhose to the different stores. It could be a variety store or a department store, and that's what he did for many years until he retired.
Now let's back up a minute and talk about your schools that you attended in New York and in Norwalk.
Oh, in New York, I only went for a few years to PS 156, and then when I came from there, I came here to Norwalk, and I went into Washington Elementary School. And it was quite a shock for me because the teacher that I had, Miss Ireland, wore a long black dress with a little lace collar and long sleeves and little shoes, and it just reminded me of 100 years back, you know. And they would walk around and ring the bell by hand to let you know classes were going to begin. It was a very small town, a small school, which was eventually taken away when they built homes and built up the Post Road. And then I went to Franklin Junior High, and then I went to Norwalk High School, where I graduated on East Avenue, and that school is now their town hall.
What year did you graduate?
51.
When you were living in Seagate or in Brooklyn. Were you in Jewish neighborhoods? Was it a mixed neighborhood?
I honestly don't know. I was so young. It didn't mean anything to me at that time. I actually didn't realize anything about other people in the world not being Jewish until I moved to Brooklyn and started going to this other school. And on the Jewish holidays, we wouldn't go to school. And there were a few people that did go to school. And I actually said to them, "Why would you go to school? It's Jewish holiday." And they said, "We're not Jewish." And that was the first time I realized that I was living in a really mixed neighborhood where almost everybody was Jewish. And this was my first understanding that there are people around that aren't Jewish. It was quite a amazing thing to me.
Do you remember, was there anti-Semitism, or was everybody?
No, I don't really remember any of that. We all got along very well. Children never seemed to get involved in anything like that. And I don't remember coming across anything like that ever in my growing up. I had Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends, and I just don't remember. And when I went to work, we would go to church. We would go to the church if they got married or they were having it. I just don't ever remember. It could have been in the background. But to my knowledge,
no overt.
No.
And how about when you moved to Norwalk?
No, in Norwalk, the same thing. I just don't remember being involved in anybody pointing me out and saying she's Jewish or that one's not Jewish.
When you graduated, I want to get a comparison with Stanford. How many students graduated in your high school class?
I don't remember.
Was it a very big class? Or?
I would say maybe 100 or so. It was a small group.
Was there only one high school in Norwalk?
Yes. It was one high school.
And were you active in any of the extracurricular activities in high school?
Yeah, I was very active. I actually was on the girls' basketball team. I was involved in the shows. I did writing I wrote plays and stories for the different books that would come out a couple of times a year. And they were published. And I was active, very active in the Jewish Center with teenage groups. And for the different holidays, I would help write and produce different plays. A lot of it was for the holidays, like would be Easter, would be Passover, and I was involved in that, acting in them and writing them, and just that was a very passionate thing of mine, writing.
From people that you met in Norwalk in high school, are there some that stood out or that you're still friendly with?
Yeah, there are some. Unfortunately, some moved away and some passed on. I was very friendly with Marion Gunther, who eventually married Stu Leonard, and her brother Steve. And there are, like I say, it wouldn't make any difference now because unfortunately they're all gone. But my friend Harry Uden and another friend Marilyn, but they live in Las Vegas. And that's really, we just had a very, Harriet Jacobson, but most of them are gone at this point, or I lost track of.
So when you graduated high school, what was the next step?
I wanted to work. I didn't want to go to school. I always worked from the day I became 16, much to my father's chagrin. He did not want me to work. But I started working in Woolworth. I loved it, and I started working in different stores. And when I graduated high school, I took courses at night, but I didn't want to go away to school. I wanted to work. So I worked for the Ham Corporation of America.
Do you remember the names of any of these stores that you worked in?
They were family stores. They're all gone. They're all gone.
But you don't recall the names?
No. I was 16, 17, no.
Hat Corporation, that was
Hat
the
Corporation.
big building on
America,
Van Zandt
yes,
Street?
Yes, that's it.
Tell
My
us
mother
about
worked
that.
for them. My mother worked for them, and I worked up in the office doing inventory control. I was working there when I married Bob, and they were great. Some of them came to our wedding, and yeah, it was really nice. Some were Jewish, some were not.
Mhm.
But we all got along, and if there was a party at the church, we went to the church. If there was something at the center, some of my young friends would go to the Jewish center with me. There was never any problem with anything like that. And when I came to Stanford and got married, I got a job right away.
Where did you get a job?
I was working on the other side of town. I worked for different companies, always in the office, almost always doing inventory control. I was like, unfortunately, the kiss of death to a lot of companies that I worked for. They either closed up or moved out of the state. This happened with 2 companies, and then I went to work for Master Set Brushes. I always had a good job, and made good money. I would make more money than Bob would at his own place. And again, they moved out of the state, and
Master Set Brushes, what were they
It was
making? What kind of brushes?
they manufactured paintbrushes. We would buy the handles, they would make the bristles, and I had to keep track of the orders that came in and exactly what department the different procedure was, where the handles were, where the bristles, how far they were, when they would be put together as a brush, where they would be shipped to and how many would be shipped. And it sounds boring, but it was.
Where was this factory located?
Down off of Fairfield Avenue.
Who was,
Sunnyside Avenue.
who was the owner?
A Jewish family, they're long gone. The Franklins, but they're not around. It was 2 brothers actually that owned it, and it's a long time ago.
And you mentioned here you worked for Comtex.
I worked for Comtex. Well, when my children were grown, and though I always liked to work, so I would work from home. I would actually work from home, doing what I hate now when anybody calls me phone soliciting for some different companies. And then when my children were married, Mark was married, Mindy was off in school, Lynn was going off to college, and Lynn kind of dared me to get a job. She said, "Mom, you're going to be lonely." I said, "No, I'm going to love it." She said, no. We went into Bloomingdale's. She teased me into signing an application for employment, and I did it. I got a job immediately. I hadn't worked in so many years, and I worked in different departments in Bloomingdale's. I did it for 2 or 3 years. And I liked it so much that I started working part-time. I worked in so many different places. Mostly it was retail. And I got fed up with retail and went into the office and started working back again in the office buildings. I mean, the list is yay long of people that I worked for.
So now that you're retired, what do you do to keep busy?
Take care of the house, babysit.
Where do you have babies?
Well, I help Lynn out. She's a school teacher. And it's funny, when she went in as a school teacher to Roxbury School, she wound up taking over, if I've got it right, I think I do, she wound up taking over the classroom of the teacher that was her kindergarten teacher. And her picture was actually on the wall. So it makes it nice when, small town. But I belong to a lot of different organizations, and I volunteer.
What do you volunteer to do?
I volunteer to usher at some of the theaters. I volunteer in school at Roxbury School. I go on some of their field trips and correct papers and read to the kids. And I haven't done it in a while, but I started up again to do that.
Have you done any traveling?
No, Bob and I don't travel much. No. We would just go for the summer to Maine or the Cape or Lake George or something, but we're not. He had all his traveling when he was in service, and he didn't want to travel anymore.
You travel to Florida, Bob?
Yeah, we travel to Florida, and we go there for the winters for a few months.
Is there any person that made a big impact on your life that you can recall?
I know my dad, because I was an only child, and he was always going to shoe stores and shoe conventions, and I went with him a few times, and I liked that, and he had a great sense of humor, and if I have any sense of humor at all, I got that from him. And my mom, she was an unbelievable person, never complained about anything ever. And she taught me a lot. She really did. She taught me how to be a good mom, and I hope that I am, and a good grandmother. And she taught me to do a lot of things as knitting and crocheting, and to love life and to be a good sport. And she was a very unusual person. Everybody loved her. Everybody had a good word for her. She lived until she was 94. Never complained ever about anything. Not like me, I complain a lot.
Well, in reflecting back now that you've been in Stanford for quite a number of years, what is your take on it? Do you think that you like it better now or better when you first moved here, when there were many small stores that were family operated and the downtown was the place where you could walk into the store and they say, oh, I know your mother, or I knew your grandfather?
Yeah, that happened a lot.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about that. I don't think it could have stayed the way it was. We did have to grow and mature in our thoughts and our ways, and it was great going down and going into Karp's Bakery or Spelke's Shoe Store or the children's store, Greenberg's, I think the name of it was. And that was nice. But I think and walking downtown, I used to walk to high school to take typing courses and all kinds of courses when I first got married. I did like that, and I would love to do it now. But we've come a long way, and I think I like Stanford the way it is now.
Where did you live when you first got married? We didn't discuss that.
Oh, well, I wanted to avoid that. We lived on Colonial Road. Bob's parents had a two-family house, and we lived upstairs. And it was okay, you know, his parents were good. His mother was a good soul, very lonely, and like as soon as I got married, I went to work. But we lived there for 14 years until, 14 years. I don't know how I did it, but I did. And Bob was never home. He was working what they now call 24/7. He was never home. And then we bought the house here on Three Lakes Drive. But I have one thought that to me is very important. God was very good to us because Bob was never around for the children, the everyday things at school or the meetings. Once in a while he would get to do that. But he's here now for the grandchildren. And anytime, I mean, Mindy in Jersey, her children, something comes up, they call us for their basketball games or their soccer games or their shows or concerts. We go. Same thing here. Anything that came up with Kara or Julie for their baseball games or whatever shows, we would go. And Kara was at the University of Tampa. She was in dance shows. We went there and we got to see her and got to go to her graduation. And now with Lance and Kyle in Stanford, they call us for every little thing and we go.
Well, I can see you're very good, committed grandparents. Well, we, on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County, we want to thank you and Bob for doing this oral interview, and you will get a copy of the DVD to share with your family and friends, which we hope you will all enjoy.
I thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you. When Bob and I got married, I was a minor, and my mother had to go to the town hall to sign permission for me to get married.
What was the date?
We got married in March 7th, 1954.
Where was the wedding held?
The wedding was held East Avenue in Norwalk at Temple Bethel.
That's my whole family. The whole Elswinger family
We'll
there.
point out who's who.
Okay, well, okay, I'll point out who's who, okay? That's my son-in-law who lives in New Jersey.
His name?
Al Botner. That's his wife there. And this is his son. And his daughter's the one that got the head turned. See that? Mm-hmm. Okay. And here's my other son-in-law, Ken Bush. This is my daughter, Lynn. And this is her son. And where's Lance? I can't see it.
Next to him.
Over here. This is hers over here. And this is my son's wife, my daughter-in-law. That's my son. And of course, that's my gorgeous wife. And this is my 24-year-old granddaughter, who just is going to get married and just bought the house in Stanford. And this is Julie, who goes to West Hill High School. She's, 17 now. We'll be graduating soon. And this guy over here is our new son-in-law. Grandson. Okay, my new grandson. She is going to marry my granddaughter right there.
Oh, grandson-in-law.
Right. And this is handsome me, right, with my gorgeous wife there. I guess I got them all, right? Get the whole. Okay, this is Veterans Day celebration at Roxbury School with my grandson and me on the stage, being honored that I'm a veteran. This is a picture of my family. My mother and father are in it, and all my uncles are in it. And
On your mother's side.
this is all on my mother's side, yeah.
Okay.
My mother's side. Okay?